The wind howled in waves, carrying the scent of lightning and the sting of cold rain. On the roof, beneath the dim flicker of his headlamp, Randy carefully pressed his bleeding hand against a cracked shingle. The rain lashed his back like knives, ice cold. The clock read 4:12 a.m. He was soaked to the bone. His work boots were heavy with water, his hands red and swollen from the cold wind and scraping against the rough surface. He had just finished a grueling 12-hour night shift at the construction site. No time to rest, no word of thanks. Just a text at 3:30 a.m. from his wife. The roof's leaking. Water's pouring all over the bedroom. He didn't think. He just went home, grabbed his tools from the garage, and climbed up onto the roof like he'd done so many times before. No complaint. No resentment. Because he loved his wife. And he loved this house. The place he believed was home. It took everything he had just to patch the leak temporarily. By the time he slid down the ladder, the rain was still hammering down. The faint yellow light from the bedroom glowed through the curtains, suggesting Heather was still awake. He opened the door. A blast of cold air greeted him. Heather sat in the kitchen, her face lit by her phone screen, blank and distant. Her dark brown hair was tied up hastily, her lips pursed in what looked like annoyance. "All done," Randy said, voice hoarse from the cold and wind. "It's patched for now. But we'll need a professional once the weather clears." Heather didn't even look up. That was it. No glance. No thank you. Randy stood there for a few seconds, then nodded and headed upstairs alone. On his way through the living room, he saw the water stains spreading across the carpet. But he had no strength left to care. His head was heavy as stone. He collapsed onto the bed, still in his wet clothes, raincoat unzipped but clinging to his back. He planned to sleep for just an hour. There was still more to do. But his body wasn't listening. He passed out. The rustling sound woke him. His head throbbed. Morning light crept through the gap in the curtain. The clock read 9:32 a.m. He'd been out for 4 hours. Heather stood before him, arms crossed, her eyes like ice. Behind her, Remington leaned against the doorway, a smirk on his face, victorious and smug. "You're up," Heather said flatly. No greeting. No smile. "Good. Saves me the trouble. What's going on?" Randy pushed himself up, a wave of pain shooting through his back. That's when he saw the 3 large garbage bags by the bedroom door. One was open just enough to reveal his favorite shirt stuffed inside. Heather didn't sugarcoat it. "Pack your things. I'm done. You're a burden." Randy stared at her, stunned. "What?" Remington chuckled and tossed the keys to Randy's truck onto the bed. "Go cry somewhere else, old man. Nobody wants you here." His eyes landed on his wallet sitting open on the nightstand, completely empty. He remembered clearly, he had $200 in it yesterday. "Heather, what is this?" She pointed at the bags. "You have 5 minutes. Or I'm calling the cops." Randy shot to his feet. "You can't be serious. After everything I've done, for this family, last night I was on the roof in a storm because of a single text from you." Heather's face remained blank. "And today, you're leaving. I've had enough. I deserve better." Remington stepped forward, blocking the door. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a loser. Always whining about money. My mom's tired of it." Randy looked at the people he used to call family. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from heartbreak. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He just quietly picked up the garbage bags. As he passed Remington, the boy raised his phone to record. "He's about to snap, Mom. This is our evidence in case he does something." Heather sighed. "Get out of my house. My house. That word stabbed deep. This house, Randy had inherited it from his grandfather. He had paid every dime for repairs and maintenance. But today, he stood there, homeless, penniless, and alone. On the fridge, a hastily scribbled note in a familiar handwriting. You're dead weight. Get out. Randy doesn't quite remember how he got out of the house. Only that the rain hadn't stopped. He stuffed the drenched garbage bags into the back of his old pickup truck and climbed into the driver's seat. His back throbbed. His left hand trembled. The damp raincoat clung coldly to his shoulders. The engine turned over. He had nowhere to go. No one to call. He drove to the parking lot of a 24-hour supermarket and sat in the cab in silence. No radio. No phone. Just quiet. He kept replaying every word. Especially the laughter. The cold, empty look in Heather's eyes. A dark thought slipped in. If he'd fallen from the roof last night, would they have cried? Or just calculated the payout? He closed his eyes. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, rhythmic, like a ticking clock. A countdown. To a plan. He wasn't going to die. And he wasn't going to let them win. The next afternoon, Randy drove to the rundown apartment complex where Wyatt lived alone. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, old and quiet enough that he could hear the wind slipping through cracked window panes. Wyatt stood on the steps, holding 2 cups of hot coffee and wearing an honest smile. You look like you just crawled out of hell, Wyatt said, handing him a cup. Come in. Not much in here, but at least it's warm. The apartment was small, but cozy. On the wall hung a photo of a construction crew in hard hats lifting steel beams, an old shot of their team. Randy spotted himself in the corner, younger, grinning from ear to ear. What happened? Wyatt asked once they sat down. Randy hesitated. Then, like a valve being cracked open, it all poured out, from the leaking roof in the storm, to the trash bags, to the cold message taped to the fridge. Wyatt was silent the entire time. When Randy finished, he said only one thing. You didn't deserve any of that. Randy glanced down at his still scraped hands. He took a deep breath. I'm not letting it go. The next day, Randy opened a new bank account at a different branch, far from the one Heather had access to. Then he went to the insurance company, where he learned something that left him frozen. His life insurance policy had been increased to $350,000 3 months ago. Without his signature. He signed papers to revert the policy to its original coverage. New beneficiary, his sister, a schoolteacher who lived 2 hours away. He began documenting everything. The accidentally left out medical bills. The whispered conversations between Heather and Rem that fell silent the moment he entered the room. The offhand remarks about a friend's husband who died after a minor surgery. He wrote it all down. Then he bought an external hard drive. Every time Heather called to ask about bank accounts or Rem asked if the pain was still bad, Randy hit record. Their state allowed one-party consent for recordings. He confirmed the legal details with the lawyer Wyatt had connected him to, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Angela. You're not the first, she said. But I promise you'll be the last one she plays. Randy stayed at Wyatt's for the next 2 weeks. He rerouted his mail to the temporary address, canceled old credit cards, changed all his passwords. Each step felt like cutting a thread tying him to the woman he used to call his wife. One afternoon, while grabbing groceries at a small local store, he ran into Heather's cousin Karen. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned in. I'm sorry, Randy. I heard about the roof. Heather told everyone you were lazy, not working, just sponging off her. But I know you. I know that's not true. And I overheard something. She's been planning to get rid of you for months. She faked the roof leak, used a garden hose to make it look like water damage. I heard her brag about it at my mom's birthday party. Randy didn't reply. He just nodded and walked away. But inside, something ignited. This wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated. The following week, Angela called him into her office. The file on her desk was thick. She flipped through the pages, pointing to the forged loan Heather had taken out against the house, $25,000, just 1 week before kicking him out. The loan, the signature, the wire transfer, it's all fake. And the house? Still under your name. Because it was inherited from your grandfather, it's not considered marital property under state law if the marriage is under 10 years. And you've been married 7. Randy felt stunned. The house he once thought he'd been evicted from like a squatter, it was legally his. Angela smirked. She picked the wrong guy to scam. The next week, Randy hired a private investigator to track Heather and Rem's finances. The photos he got back showed Craig driving a used sports car, a new flat-screen TV mounted in the living room, and granite counters being installed in the kitchen. All paid for with the money from the fraudulent loan in Randy's name. That same day, he called Angela. "I want to file suit," he said. "I want my house back. And my dignity." Angela's reply was simple. "It's time." 3 days later, at precisely 8:59 a.m., Randy sat in his truck parked a few houses down from his former home. Angela was next to him, calm, composed. A sheriff's car pulled up to the curb and parked out front. "You ready for this?" Angela asked. "I've been ready since the night they laughed," Randy said. They waited a minute to give the sheriff time to serve the notice. Then, they stepped out of the truck and approached the house together. Through the glass panels on the front door, Randy could already see movement inside, shadows darting, a curtain pulled aside. When the door opened, Craig was standing there in pajama pants, hair sticking up, confused and squinting into the sun. Behind him, Heather approached quickly, robe tied tight, face pale. "What the hell is this?" she snapped at the sheriff. "Notice to vacate," the officer replied, handing her the stack of documents. "You have 48 hours to leave this property." Heather's eyes flicked to Randy, standing just behind the officer. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I am," Randy said calmly. "It's all legal. The house is mine." Angela stepped forward. "And just so you're clear, the fraudulent loan, the forged signature, the misuse of funds, all included in the civil suit. You might want to get your own lawyer." Craig stepped forward, puffing his chest. "This is bull." The sheriff held up a hand. "I suggest you step back, son." Heather flipped through the papers, her hands trembling. We remodeled. We added value. We paid the mortgage." Randy shook his head. "No. I did. With my inheritance. And you tried to sell me out for a check." She opened her mouth to argue, but there was nothing left to say. Randy turned around and walked back to his truck. 48 hours. Then everything would change. Randy returned 48 hours later, not alone this time. Angela rode beside him again, and another deputy sheriff followed in a separate vehicle. The morning air was crisp, the sky a pale gray that threatened rain. When they arrived, the driveway was empty. Craig's sports car was gone. So were the unfamiliar vehicles that had been there last time. Through the windows, the house looked still, eerily still. Angela knocked. No answer. The deputy knocked harder, called out. Moments later, Heather opened the door, eyes swollen, makeup smeared, hair disheveled. Behind her, the house was in disarray, boxes, overturned furniture, dishes piled in the sink. The pristine renovations had stopped midway. Paint cans lined the hallway. The granite counter was only half installed. "You ready?" Angela asked evenly. Heather nodded slowly. She looked smaller now, shrunken somehow, as if the weight of consequence had finally sunk in. Craig was nowhere to be seen. "We're going," she muttered. "Just, let me finish packing a few things." "You've had 48 hours, the deputy said. 10 more minutes. Then we supervise." Randy stayed on the porch, arms folded, saying nothing. He watched as she shuffled between rooms, dragging a duffel bag behind her, avoiding his gaze. When she passed him to step outside, she stopped for a second. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." He looked her dead in the eye. "That's because you never really knew me." She opened her mouth again, maybe to say sorry, maybe to lash out, but thought better of it. She walked to the car waiting at the curb and drove away. Randy stepped inside. The silence was deafening. His house. It smelled like someone else now, her cheap perfume still hung in the curtains, his old recliner was missing, the photo frames were empty. But it was his. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Angela stepped beside him. "We'll take care of the rest," she said. "Locks will be changed today. Next week, we begin the fraud case officially. But you're back home, Randy." He nodded. "Thanks, Angela." That night, he sat on the porch with Wyatt. The two of them shared a six-pack and a quiet that didn't need to be filled. "You gonna keep the granite counters?" Wyatt asked, tipping his beer toward the kitchen window. Randy laughed, a genuine laugh, the first in weeks. "Hell no. First thing to go." "Good. They're ugly anyway." They sat for a while in silence. Finally, Randy spoke. "I don't feel victorious. Just, done." Wyatt nodded. "Sometimes that's enough." 3 days later, Remington called. Randy let it go to voicemail. He listened later that evening, sitting on the floor of the bedroom, staring at the peeling paint she'd never let him fix. "Dad," Rem said, his voice cracking. "Mom hasn't left the apartment in 2 days. She doesn't eat. Just stares at the wall. I didn't mean what I said. I didn't. Please, can we talk?" Randy didn't respond. "Not yet. But maybe someday." For now, he picked up the phone and called a contractor. "Yeah," he said. "I need a new roof. A real one this time. And we're starting fresh." A week passed. The roof was stripped and replaced. The granite countertops removed. Randy repainted the living room himself, sunlight yellow, a color Heather would have hated. The first morning he woke up without pain in his back or weight in his chest. He stood at the window and watched the sunrise spill gold over the porch steps. He brewed coffee and sat outside, no noise but birds and wind. For the first time in months, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was peace. He got a message that afternoon from Alexandra, Heather's sister. She didn't say much. Just that Heather was staying with her again temporarily, and that Remington had started therapy. She didn't ask Randy to forgive them. Only said she hoped he was doing okay. Randy replied simply, "Thanks. I'm healing." Later that night, Randy stood in the garage. The space still smelled faintly of oil and old wood. He stared at the workbench, still scattered with tools from the last project he never got to finish. A small wooden chair for a boy who used to sit on his shoulders. He touched the half-finished frame. He might never fix what had broken between them. But maybe, someday, he could build something better. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Wyatt, holding 2 burgers and a 6-pack. "Roof looks solid," he said, nodding up at the house. "And you look lighter." Randy smiled. "I feel lighter." They sat on lawn chairs in the driveway, sharing food and stories and silence. Randy told him about the job offer in Oregon, fresh start, small town, decent pay. Not a running away kind of move. More like a moving toward. "You taking it?" Wyatt asked. "Not yet," Randy said. I've got one more thing to do here. That Sunday, Randy drove out to the park. The one with the little lake and the wooden pier where he used to take Rem fishing. He sat on the bench for hours, watching the water ripple in the wind, letting the weight of memories come and go without dragging him under. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Remington. I heard you're trying. That matters. I'm not ready yet. But keep working on yourself. Maybe one day we'll fish again. Take care of your mom. Dad. He hit send. Then he stood up, stretched his back, and walked away from the past, toward something new, something clean, something earned. He didn't know what the future looked like. But this time, it would be his. 2 months later, Randy stepped off the bus in the small Oregon town where the morning fog rolled low over the pines. The air smelled clean, earthy. He carried one duffel bag over his shoulder and a manila folder tucked under one arm, papers, resumes, fresh beginnings. The apartment he'd rented was modest but bright, with wide windows and a view of the hills. He unpacked slowly, methodically, setting up each space with care. He mounted a photo of his late grandfather above the kitchen counter, just him and a rusting hammer in hand, grinning. It felt right. Like coming full circle. The first week of the new job passed quietly. The crew was smaller, the pace more manageable. Randy found comfort in the rhythm of measured labor, the way physical work made his mind go still. He came home tired, but it was a good kind of tired. On his third Friday there, he found a letter waiting in the mailroom. It was from Remington. The handwriting was shaky, like he'd rewritten it more than once. Dad. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know I've been trying. Therapy sucks, but I'm doing it. Mom's not great, but we're surviving. I've been thinking about that time you built me the treehouse. I thought it was just a box back then, but now I get it. You built me something safe when I didn't know I needed it. If you ever want to talk, I'd like to hear your voice. Rem. Randy sat on the couch with the letter in his hands long after the sun went down. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The ache in his chest wasn't pain this time. It was something softer. Something like the first breath after winter. He didn't call that night. But he wrote back the next morning. Rem. Thank you. That's a start. Let's keep going, one step at a time. Dad. Later that week, he took a drive through the back roads, winding past tall fir trees and creeks that glittered in the sun. He found a quiet patch of land for sale, a little clearing with a view of the mountains. It was out of his price range for now, but he took a picture anyway. One day, he thought. One day, maybe I'll build something here. Not to hide in. But to grow in. He drove back home with the windows down, wind in his hair, and for the first time in a long time. He sang along with the radio. The weeks passed quietly. Randy started hiking on weekends, sometimes alone, sometimes with a few coworkers who slowly became friends. The mountains became his refuge, silent, vast, and indifferent. Just what he needed. He began volunteering at a local shelter, repairing furniture, fixing broken locks, helping those rebuilding like he had. There was something healing in service, in helping hands that asked nothing in return. Then, one Saturday morning, Randy received a surprise call from his sister. Heather checked herself into a clinic, she said, her voice cautious. Voluntarily. She's in treatment now. Addiction, depression, the whole cocktail. Randy didn't say anything for a while. He stood at his window, watching a squirrel dart across the balcony railing. She's trying, he finally asked. Apparently. Remington visits her once a week. He says it's real this time. He nodded, even though no one could see him. That's good. That night, he reread Remington's letter. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a message. Tell your mom I hope she finds her footing. Tell her I said thank you for raising a boy who's trying to be a better man. No reply came, but he didn't expect one. On a quiet evening in mid-autumn, Randy sat on a bench overlooking the hills. A small festival was happening in the town square below, lights, music, kids running around with cotton candy. He didn't join, but he smiled at the sound of it. A young woman with a camera stopped nearby. Beautiful view, huh? He nodded. Yeah. Reminds me why I came here. They chatted for a few minutes. Her name was Claire. She worked at the library. Loved poetry. Hated olives. Laughed easily. She didn't ask about his past, and he didn't offer. For now, the present was enough. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting everything in gold, Randy realized something. He hadn't just rebuilt. He'd begun again. And this time, he wasn't building for someone else. He was building for himself. And whatever came next. This story is about survival, awakening, and the quiet strength that comes from choosing yourself after being betrayed by the people you trusted the most. At its core, Randy's journey is a testament to the power of resilience. He endures a devastating betrayal from his wife and stepson, people he worked tirelessly to support and protect. But instead of letting that betrayal define him, Randy uses it as a turning point. Through pain, silence, and loss, he discovers clarity. It's about how trauma doesn't always break you, it can sharpen you. Randy doesn't explode in rage or seek revenge with malice. Instead, he quietly rebuilds. He regains control over his life, step by step, cutting ties with toxicity and reclaiming what's his with dignity and patience. There's also a message about identity. For years, Randy defined himself by how he showed up for others, his wife, his stepson, his family. But in starting over, he learns how to show up for himself. By the end, he's not just healing, he's free. The story is hopeful without being naive. It acknowledges the scars, the consequences, and the complexities of forgiveness. It reminds us that walking away isn't weakness, it's sometimes the strongest thing a person can do. And that beginning again, even later in life, is still possible, and deeply worth it.